At 4:01 p.m. on the 25th of April 2014, a supercell thunderstorm that had been tracking northeast across eastern North Carolina produced a funnel cloud near the town of Windsor in Bertie County. The National Weather Service in Wakefield, Virginia, had already issued a tornado warning for the area at 3:55 p.m., but for residents in the path, 6 minutes was not much more than a whisper of warning. The sky had turned an ominous green. The air was heavy and still. Then, without any further signal, the funnel touched down just south of Windsor, a small community of about 2,000 people nestled near the Roanoke River. The tornado was on the ground. For the next 12 minutes, that rotating column of air, later rated an EF3 on the enhanced Fujita scale, carved a path roughly 7.5 miles long and up to 900 yards wide. It moved northeast at around 30 miles per hour, tearing through farmland, forests, and residential neighborhoods. At 4:02 p.m., 1 minute after touchdown, the tornado struck a mobile home park on the southern edge of Windsor. A woman named Betty Lou Harrell, 77 years old, was in her mobile home when the structure was lifted off its foundation and rolled across the lot. She did not survive. 3 other people in the same park were injured, some critically, as debris from shattered homes became projectiles driven by winds estimated at 140 miles per hour. At 4:04 p.m., the tornado crossed U.S. Highway 17, throwing a pickup truck into a ditch and flipping a tractor-trailer onto its side. The driver of the truck survived but later described the sound as a freight train, a phrase tornado survivors use so often it has become cliché, but that does not make it any less real. At 4:06 p.m., the tornado tore the roof off a brick elementary school. The school was empty as classes had ended for the day, but the building sustained partial collapse of its gymnasium. Less than a minute later, it swept through a cluster of frame houses on the north side of town. In one home, a family of 4 huddled in a bathtub under a mattress as the roof was pulled away. They survived. 2 houses away, a man was trapped in his basement when the stairs collapsed above him. Rescue crews would need 40 minutes to dig him out. At 4:08 p.m., the tornado reached its peak intensity, carving a swath through a wooded area where it snapped hundreds of tall pine trees like matchsticks and debarked them, stripping the bark from the trunks, a hallmark of violent tornadoes. At 4:10 p.m., it crossed the Chowan River, briefly becoming a waterspout before moving back onto land on the eastern bank. By 4:13 p.m., the rotation weakened and the tornado lifted, leaving behind a corridor of destruction that measured roughly a mile wide at its broadest point. In total, more than 100 homes were damaged or destroyed, dozens of vehicles tossed, and the power grid in and around Windsor was knocked out. Hundreds of trees blocked roads. Emergency responders from Bertie County, the North Carolina Highway Patrol, and volunteer fire departments converged on the area, but the scale of the damage made access difficult. The first helicopters arrived from the North Carolina National Guard at 4:45 p.m. What happened in Windsor that afternoon was not a mystery in the meteorological sense. The ingredients for a severe thunderstorm were present. A cold front moving east from the Appalachians clashed with warm, moist air streaming north from the Gulf of Mexico. The atmosphere was unstable. Wind shear, the change in wind speed and direction with height, was strong enough to create rotation. The Storm Prediction Center had placed much of eastern North Carolina under a moderate risk for severe weather earlier that morning. Forecasters knew that tornadoes were possible. But predicting which specific thunderstorm would produce a tornado, and at exactly what minute, remains an imprecise science. The National Weather Service had issued a tornado warning for Bertie County at 3:55 p.m., a full 6 minutes before the tornado touched down. For a tornado warning, 6 minutes is considered good lead time. For the woman who died in her mobile home, those 6 minutes were not enough. Betty Lou Harrell had lived in that mobile home for nearly 20 years. Her daughter later told investigators that her mother had heard the warning, but mobile homes are not designed to withstand even moderate tornadoes. They are often anchored to the ground with simple straps, and the walls are thin aluminum sheeting over a wood frame. When the EF3 tornado struck, the structure was lifted, twisted, and thrown 50 feet. The National Weather Service survey team would later note that the mobile home had no basement and no interior safe room. The only option for shelter would have been to leave the home entirely and seek a sturdier structure. But at 4:01 p.m., with the tornado already on the ground, there was no time. What investigators found in the days after the tornado was a pattern that has become tragically familiar in the American Southeast. The region sees a higher proportion of tornado fatalities than the Great Plains, not because the tornadoes are stronger on average, but because the population is denser, the terrain is forested and hilly, which reduces visibility, and a large percentage of homes are mobile homes or manufactured houses that offer little protection. Between 2000 and 2014, North Carolina ranked in the top 10 states for tornado deaths. In many cases, the people who died were elderly, living alone, or without access to a basement. The systems that failed were not one single thing. The warning system itself worked. The National Weather Service detected the rotation on radar, issued the warning and broadcasted over NOAA weather radio, local television, and cell phone alerts. But the warning reached people only if they had a working radio, a charged phone, or a television tuned to the right channel. And even if they received it, not everyone knew what to do. The American Red Cross reported that after the Windsor tornado, many residents said they did not understand the difference between a tornado watch and a tornado warning. Others assumed the storm would miss them. And for those in mobile homes, the safest option was to leave and go to a community shelter, but the nearest designated storm shelter in Windsor was a church basement 2 miles away. In a tornado warning that gives 6 minutes, 2 miles might as well be 200. The event still matters, more than a decade later, because it illustrates a persistent gap between the technical capability to warn and the practical ability to protect. In 2014, mobile homes accounted for roughly 6% of all housing units in the United States, but they were involved in nearly half of all tornado deaths. The Windsor tornado was not a rare anomaly. It was a predictable outcome of a system where weather forecasting has outpaced building codes and public preparedness. After the storm, Bertie County applied for federal disaster assistance. The Federal Emergency Management Agency approved individual assistance for residents whose homes were destroyed. But for the families who lost everything, the money came months later, and it could not replace the lives lost or the sense of security that had been ripped away in 12 minutes. How could this have happened? Look at the atmosphere. Look at the housing. Look at the warning system. Look at the human response. Each layer contributed. The Storm Prediction Center had flagged the risk, but that risk is expressed in probabilities, not certainties. The National Weather Service issued a warning, but warnings cannot force people to take cover. The local emergency management office had plans, but those plans rely on residents having their own safe place. And for one woman in a mobile home in rural eastern North Carolina, there was no safe place within reach. In the months that followed, the National Weather Service conducted a service assessment of its performance during the April 25th outbreak. They found no major failures in radar data, no missed signatures, no delayed warnings. The lead time for the Windsor tornado was above the national average. But they also noted that many tornado deaths in the southeast occur in mobile homes, and they recommended increased public outreach to vulnerable populations. They suggested that local governments consider installing more storm shelters in mobile home parks, but the recommendations were not binding. Few communities had the funds to build new shelters, and mobile home parks are often privately owned. The owners were not required to provide shelters, so the gap remained. The tornado also raised a quieter question about how people perceive risk. In the weeks after the storm, surveyors from the University of North Carolina interviewed survivors. Many said they had heard the warning but did not move to safety because they thought the tornado would not hit them directly. Others said they had no basement and believed no other shelter was available. A few said they were confused by the multiple alerts. One man told the surveyors that his cell phone buzzed with a tornado warning, but he was on the phone with his wife and ignored it. Human behavior is often the weakest link in any disaster response system, and it is the hardest to fix. So the Windsor tornado is not a story of a single catastrophic failure. It is a story of many small failures that aligned like a perfect storm of vulnerability. The warning was issued. The sun was shining in some parts of the county. The radar showed a hook echo. The mobile home had no basement. The elderly woman could not run fast enough. The tornado was on the ground. By 4:13 p.m. it was over. But the aftermath continued. For days, search and rescue teams combed through debris looking for survivors. They found none. The death toll remained at 1. By the standards of major tornado outbreaks, a single fatality might seem almost fortunate. In April 2014, other tornadoes across the country killed more than 30 people. But for the community of Windsor, one death was a wound that would not heal quickly. Betty Lou Harrell was remembered as a mother, a grandmother, a Sunday school teacher, a woman who loved her garden. Her daughter later told a local newspaper, "She was my best friend. I talked to her every day. And now she is gone because of a storm that lasted 12 minutes." The National Weather Service survey team, after cataloging the damage, rated the tornado an EF3 with winds of 140 miles per hour. They noted that the tornado had lofted a 2-ton pickup truck into a field, had stripped bark from hardwood trees, and had flattened well-built frame homes. They also noted that many homes in the path were not anchored to their foundations properly, a common construction flaw in rural areas where building codes are minimal or not enforced. The survey team's report was filed. The data was added to the national database. The tornado was given a number, 1 for. It was not the strongest storm that day. It was not the deadliest. But it was a clear illustration of how a moderate tornado in the wrong place can kill. The questions that lingered after the Windsor tornado do not have easy answers. How do you make a mobile home safe from an EF3? You cannot. You can only build a separate shelter or convince people to leave. How do you convince people to leave when they have lived in the same home for 20 years and never seen a tornado? You have to change the culture of risk perception, and that takes generations. How do you fund shelter construction in rural counties with limited tax bases? You have to redirect federal or state money, and that takes political will. The tornado itself did not care about any of these questions. It was just physics, a column of rotating air that formed, touched down, and dissipated. But the human system around that column of air is what determines whether the tornado kills or does not. And that system in Windsor, North Carolina on the 25th of April 2014 did not protect everyone. In the days that followed the Windsor tornado, the community of Bertie County began the slow, painful process of sorting through the wreckage. Debris removal crews arrived from neighboring counties. The Red Cross set up a shelter at the local high school. Volunteers brought water, food, and clothing. But for the family of Betty Lou Harrell, there was no replacing what had been taken. Her funeral was held 3 days later at the chapel of a local funeral home. The pews were full. The pastor spoke about the fragility of life and the suddenness of the storm. He quoted scripture. He reminded the congregation that they were called to support one another. But the grief was raw and the questions remained unanswered. Why her? Why that afternoon? Why a mobile home with no basement? Across the county, 30 other families were displaced. Some moved in with relatives. Others stayed in the Red Cross shelter until they could find temporary housing. The Federal Emergency Management Agency approved individual assistance for residents whose homes were destroyed, but the process required paperwork, proof of ownership, and patience. For a retired couple living on a fixed income in a mobile home that was now a pile of twisted metal and shattered drywall, patience was in short supply. They had no insurance. Many mobile home owners in rural North Carolina do not carry windstorm coverage because the premiums are too high or because they assume the risk is low. After the tornado, they learned that the Stafford Act provides disaster assistance only for uninsured losses, but the maximum payout for temporary housing is capped, and it rarely covers the full cost of a replacement home. The gap between what the government provides and what a family needs can stretch for years. Meanwhile, the National Weather Service continued its service assessment. They interviewed emergency managers in Bertie and surrounding counties. They reviewed the radar data from the Morehead City office. They studied the timing of the warning and the response. What they found was not a failure of meteorology, but a failure of translation. The warning had been issued at 3:37 p.m. The tornado touched down at 3:51 p.m. That was 14 minutes of lead time, above the national average of 13 minutes. But in that 14 minutes, many people heard the warning and did nothing. One woman told the survey team that she heard the siren but thought it was a test. She lived 2 miles from the fire station and the siren was faint. Another man said he saw the sky turn green and heard the roar, but he did not move because he could not believe a tornado would hit his neighborhood. He had lived there for 40 years and never seen one. The problem was not the accuracy of the forecast. It was the psychology of risk. People in the Southeast are less likely to take tornado warnings seriously than people in the Great Plains, partly because tornadoes are less frequent, partly because the storms often occur at night or in rain-wrapped conditions where they cannot be seen, and partly because the built environment offers fewer safe options. In Kansas, a family can go to the basement. In Alabama, a family might have a storm shelter. In eastern North Carolina, a family in a mobile home often has neither. The choice becomes, stay in the mobile home and hope the tornado misses or get in the car and drive into the storm. Neither option feels safe. The Windsor tornado also highlighted a regional pattern that meteorologists call the Southeast tornado problem. It is not that the tornadoes are stronger. The Southeast does get violent tornadoes, but the deadliest events often involve moderate tornadoes hitting vulnerable structures. The death toll from the April 25th outbreak in North Carolina was 3. That is 3 too many, but it is small compared to the April 2011 super outbreak that killed over 300 across the South. Yet each death carries the same weight. A family shattered, a life cut short, a community grieving. The Windsor tornado was in many ways a microcosm of the larger challenge facing the warning enterprise. To understand why, we have to look at the geography. The coastal plain of North Carolina is flat, agricultural, and dotted with small towns. The population is spread out, with many people living on rural roads far from the nearest fire station or hospital. Mobile homes are common because they are affordable. The median household income in Bertie County in 2014 was just over $30,000, well below the state average. Building a safe room or a basement can cost $10,000 to $20,000, which is out of reach for many families. The result is a population that is both exposed to tornado risk and structurally unable to mitigate it. After the storm, the National Weather Service recommended that local governments partner with mobile home park owners to install community storm shelters. They also recommended that NOAA weather radio be distributed to vulnerable households, and that public education campaigns emphasize the difference between a watch and a warning. But these recommendations were not funded. The county applied for a grant from the North Carolina Division of Emergency Management to build a shelter in the area where the tornado had struck. The grant was approved 2 years later. The shelter was built at a community center 3 miles from the site of Betty Lou Harrell's mobile home. It can hold 100 people. It has a generator, emergency supplies, and an NOAA weather radio that is programmed to sound an alarm automatically. But for the families who lost their homes in 2014, the shelter came too late. What about the broader outbreak? On April 25, 2014, the Storm Prediction Center had issued a moderate risk of severe thunderstorms for much of the Carolinas and Virginia. The ingredients were classic: a strong low-pressure system moving from the Mississippi Valley toward the east coast, pulling warm, moist air northward from the Gulf of Mexico while a cold front swept in from the west. The atmosphere was unstable with high Cape values, a measure of thunderstorm energy. Wind shear was strong, with winds changing direction and speed with height, creating the rotation that fuels supercells. By early afternoon, thunderstorms began to develop over Georgia and South Carolina and moved northeast into North Carolina. The tornado that hit Windsor was one of 19 confirmed tornadoes that day across the southeast. Most were weak EF0 and EFone, but 2 were EF3, including the Windsor Tornado and another near the town of Rocky Mount. Together, these storms killed 3 people and injured dozens more. In the aftermath, NOAA researchers studied the radar signatures of the Windsor storm. They found a classic hook echo and a debris ball, a radar signature that indicates objects being lofted into the air. The 3-dimensional scans showed a strong mesocyclone aloft with a tornado vortex signature at lower levels. In short, the storm was textbook. The warning went out, the siren sounded, the radio broadcast, and still Betty Lou Harrell died in her mobile home. The question that remains is not about the science of the tornado, but about the sociology of the warning. Why do some people act and others not? The University of North Carolina survey team asked survivors that question in the weeks after the storm. They found that the most consistent predictor of whether a person took shelter was prior experience with tornadoes. People who had survived a tornado in the past were far more likely to seek shelter than those who had not. Experience changed behavior, but that is a slow process. New residents move into mobile home parks without that experience. Children grow up without learning to take warnings seriously. The memory of a storm fades after a few years. There is also the issue of multiple information sources. On April 25th, many residents received the warning from their cell phones through the wireless emergency alert system. But the alerts are short, only 90 characters, and they do not include specific guidance on what to do. Some residents said they saw the alert but did not know if the tornado was in their immediate area. Others said they assumed the alert was for the county as a whole and that the storm would not hit exactly where they lived. The human brain struggles with probabilistic information. A warning that says take shelter now is clear. A warning that says a tornado has been spotted near X moving east at 30 miles per hour requires interpretation. For a person who has never been through a tornado, interpretation can be fatal. The Windsor tornado also exposed the limitations of outdoor warning sirens. In many rural counties, sirens are designed to warn people who are outside, not people inside their homes. The sound does not penetrate walls well, especially if the home is air-conditioned or if a television is on. Bertie County had sirens in the town of Windsor, but they were not audible in the outlying rural areas where the mobile home parks were located. The county emergency manager later said that the sirens were intended to cover the population centers, not the scattered homes along 2-lane roads. For the people who needed the warning most, the sirens were silent. So what has changed since 2014? In 2015, FEMA updated its guidelines for tornado-safe rooms, making it easier for communities to apply for grant funding. The National Weather Service launched a new initiative called Weather Ready Nation, aimed at improving public readiness through partnerships with schools, businesses, and local governments. North Carolina adopted a statewide building code that requires new mobile homes to be anchored to a foundation, though the code is only enforced for new installations. Existing mobile homes, like the one Betty Lou Harrell lived in, are grandfathered in. The county where Windsor is located has installed 3 new storm shelters since 2014, but they are located in town centers, miles from the most vulnerable homes. The deeper issue remains. The gap between the science of prediction and the practice of protection will always exist. We can forecast tornadoes more accurately than ever. We can issue warnings with longer lead times. We can build shelters, but we cannot force people to move. We cannot force them to leave their homes every time a warning is issued. We cannot retrofit every mobile home. The Windsor tornado is a reminder that the most advanced weather prediction system in the world is only as good as the last mile of delivery. And in that last mile, the human element is everything. The woman who hears the warning but stays because she has nowhere to go. The man who hears the siren but thinks it is a test. The family who watches the sky from their living room window, unsure if the clouds mean danger or just rain. The elderly couple who cannot walk to the neighbor's brick home because the arthritis in their joints will not let them move fast enough. These are the real vulnerabilities that no radar can see and no forecast can fix. The tornado itself did not discriminate. It hit the mobile home and the brick house equally. But the brick house with a basement survived. The mobile home did not. The people in the brick house walked out unharmed. The people in the mobile home did not. The difference was not the storm, it was the structure. It was the preparation. It was the ability to respond in the seconds that mattered most. For Betty Lou Harrell, there was no safe room, no basement, no neighbor with a truck to take her to the church shelter 2 miles away. She was alone in her home when the tornado struck. The National Weather Service assessment concluded that her death was preventable, a phrase that appears in dozens of post-storm reports across the country. Preventable but not prevented. The warning worked. The system functioned. But the system does not save everyone. In the years since, meteorologists and social scientists have continued to study the Windsor tornado. They have used it as a case study in public response. They have presented papers at conferences. They have written journal articles. But on the ground in Bertie County, the memory of that afternoon has faded into the background of everyday life. The debris has been cleared. The homes have been rebuilt, some in the same location, still mobile homes, still without basements. The county's emergency management office holds annual tornado drills. The sirens are tested the first Wednesday of every month. And every spring when the storms roll in from the west, a few more people take the warning seriously. But not all, not yet. The Windsor tornado in the end is not a story of failure. It is a story of limits, the limits of technology, the limits of public education, the limits of human behavior, and the limits of a system that cannot reach every person in every home in time. It is a story that repeats itself every year somewhere in the United States, in a mobile home park in Alabama, in a rural farmhouse in Missouri, in a roadside motel in Kentucky. The names change, the dates change, but the pattern does not. On April 25, 2014 at 3:51 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, a tornado touched down in Bertie County, North Carolina. It lasted 12 minutes. It killed 1 person. It destroyed 23 homes. It left a scar on the land and on the hearts of a small community. And it left a question that will not go away: what else could have been done? At 4:03 p.m. on April 25, 2014, the National Weather Service office in Morehead City, North Carolina, received a report of a tornado on the ground near the intersection of U.S. Highway 17 and State Road 150. The report came from a trained storm spotter who had watched the funnel cross a soybean field and tear into a cluster of trees. His voice was calm but clipped. He gave the location, the direction of movement, and an estimate of the damage. The dispatcher relayed the information to the Emergency Operations Center in Bertie County. But by then, the tornado had already been on the ground for 12 minutes. The dead were already down. The homes were already gone. The first emergency responders arrived at the mobile home park off State Road 1500 at 4:07 p.m. They found a scene of organized destruction. The mobile homes had been stripped from their foundations. One was flipped onto its roof. Another was wrapped around a pine tree. Debris, insulation, plywood, clothing, photographs was scattered across the field and into the surrounding woods. A deputy sheriff from the Bertie County Sheriff's Office later told reporters that it looked like a giant hand had swept through the area. There was no sound except the wind in the trees and the occasional crack of a falling branch. The first thing they did was search for survivors. Betty Lou Harrell was found inside what remained of her mobile home. The structure had been lifted off its cinder block piers, rotated about 30 degrees, and then dropped. The walls had collapsed inward. The roof was gone. She was pinned beneath a section of the ceiling. There was no pulse. The medical examiner later determined that she had died from blunt force trauma to the head and torso. The time of death was estimated at 3:55 p.m., approximately 4 minutes after the tornado struck her home. She was 67 years old. She had lived in that mobile home for 11 years. The other 16 residents of the park had been injured. Some had cuts and bruises. Others had broken bones. One man suffered a punctured lung when a piece of siding was driven through the wall of his home and into his chest. He was airlifted to a hospital in Greenville. He survived. The injuries were severe, but they were not fatal. The difference between his outcome and Betty Lou Harrell's outcome came down to seconds and inches. He had been in the bathroom of his mobile home when the tornado hit. That room was near the center of the structure. The bathroom walls were reinforced with plumbing. When the mobile home was lifted and dropped, the bathroom frame held together. He was trapped but alive. Betty Lou had been in her living room near a large window which likely exploded inward during the initial wind pressure. The location within the home mattered. By 4:30 p.m., the Bertie County Emergency Management Director had declared a local state of emergency. The American Red Cross set up a shelter at the Windsor High School gymnasium. About 24 people arrived that night. They were given cots, blankets, and meals. The Red Cross also distributed comfort kits with toiletries and snacks. The shelter stayed open for 4 days. By the 3rd day, most residents had found temporary housing with family or friends. A few were moved into motels in Williamston and Edenton. The debris removal began on the morning of April 26. County Public Works crews used front-end loaders and dump trucks to clear the roads. The National Weather Service sent a damage survey team from the Morehead City office. They arrived at 10 a.m. The team consisted of 2 meteorologists and a technician. They wore hard hats, safety vests, and boots. They carried GPS units, cameras, and measuring wheels. They walked the entire path of the tornado, from the touchdown point near the Kashi River to the dissipation point near the intersection of State Road 1502 and State Road 156. The survey team documented the damage systematically. They assigned ratings to each structure based on the enhanced Fujita scale. The mobile home park was rated of.This with estimated winds of 120 miles per hour. A brick house about half a mile east of the park was rated E-phone with winds of 95 miles per hour. A metal barn near the dissipation point was rated EF0 with winds of 75 miles per hour. The pattern was consistent with a tornado that had a narrow, intense core and a broader, weaker periphery. The survey team also noticed something else. Several trees along the tornado path had been debarked on one side only. The bark was stripped away, leaving the wood exposed. That was a sign of high-velocity winds but also of debris impact. The trees acted like anemometers. The direction of the bark stripping indicated the wind direction and the intensity. The team took photographs and measurements. These data were later used to validate the radar estimates. Back at the office, the meteorologists reviewed the radar data from the KRAX radar in Morehead City. The radar had been scanning the storm at 5-minute intervals. The data showed a strong mesocyclone at 3:45 p.m., about 6 minutes before the tornado touched down. At 3:48 p.m., the radar detected a debris ball. That is a radar signature where the beam reflects off of debris lofted into the air. It appears as a small, circular area of high reflectivity. The debris ball was located exactly where the mobile home park later stood. The warning had been issued at 3:38 p.m., 7 minutes before the debris ball appeared. The lead time was 12 minutes for the first warning. That was within the national average for tornado warnings in Tuzirunifer. But the lead time was not the same for every resident. Some residents later told surveyors that they received the warning on their cell phones at 3:40 p.m. Others did not receive it until 3:47 p.m. The wireless emergency alert system uses cell towers to broadcast messages. The message is sent to all towers within a defined polygon. But the polygon is drawn by the National Weather Service, and it is based on the warning area. In this case, the warning area covered most of Bertie County. The cell towers in the rural parts of the county were less densely spaced. Some residents were in a coverage gap. Their phones did not receive the alert until they moved closer to a tower. That delay of 7 minutes was fatal for Betty Lou Harrell. She received the alert at 3:47 p.m., 4 minutes before the tornado struck her home. She had 4 minutes to decide. She did not move. The question of why she did not move was examined by the University of North Carolina survey team. They interviewed her relatives and neighbors. They learned that she had lived in eastern North Carolina her entire life. She remembered Hurricane Fran in 1996 and Hurricane Floyd in 1999. She had taken shelter for those events, but she had never experienced a tornado. She did not know what the siren meant. She had told a neighbor that she thought the siren was a monthly test. The test is always on the first Wednesday of the month. April 25th was a Friday, but the test schedule is not widely known. In rural areas, many residents do not know the difference between a test and a real emergency. There was also the question of the mobile home itself. Betty Lou Harrell did not own a car. She relied on her son to drive her to appointments. On that Friday afternoon, her son was at work. She had no way to leave. She could have walked to the neighbor's house, but the neighbor's house was also a mobile home. It was not safe either. The nearest brick house was a quarter of a mile away. She had a heart condition. She could not walk that distance quickly. She stayed. In the weeks after the tornado, the Bertie County Board of Commissioners held a public meeting. About 40 residents attended. The county emergency manager gave a presentation on the warning process. He explained that the sirens had been activated within 2 minutes of the National Weather Service warning. He explained that the cell phone alerts were sent automatically. He explained that the county had a plan, but the residents had questions. Why were there no storm shelters in the mobile home park? Why were the sirens not loud enough to hear inside homes? Why did the warning come so late for some people? The emergency manager answered as honestly as he could. The county did not have the funding for storm shelters in every mobile home park. The sirens were designed for outdoor warning, not indoor. The cell phone coverage in rural areas was a federal issue, not a county issue. The answers were not satisfying, but they were true. The state of North Carolina did take some action. In July 2014, the state legislature passed a bill that required all new mobile homes sold in the state to include a weather radio or a cell phone with a weather alert app. The bill was called the Betty Lou Harrell Act. It was signed into law by Governor Pat McCrory. It was a small step, but it was the first time the state had explicitly addressed the vulnerability of mobile home residents to tornadoes. The law took effect on January 1, 2015. It did not apply to existing mobile homes. The National Weather Service also made changes. In 2015, they introduced a new type of warning called the tornado emergency. That is a higher level of urgency, used when a tornado has been confirmed and is expected to cause catastrophic damage. The tornado emergency includes a specific phrase in the warning text and triggers a different tone on weather radios. The Windsor tornado was not a catastrophic event by national standards, one death, not dozens, but it was catastrophic for the people who lived there. The tornado emergency might have made a difference. It might have prompted more people to act, but it is not a guarantee. The broader question remains about the sociology of warnings. Researchers at the University of Oklahoma studied the Windsor tornado as part of a larger project on public response. They found that mobile home residents are less likely to take shelter than residents of permanent homes. The reasons are complex. Mobile home residents often have lower incomes. They may not have a car, they may not have a neighbor with a safe house, they may not have health insurance, they may have a fear of leaving their property unattended, they may not trust the government, they may not believe that a tornado will hit them. These are not irrational choices. They are rational responses to their circumstances. The Windsor tornado also highlighted the role of social networks. The survey team found that people who received the warning from a family member or friend were more likely to take shelter than people who received it from a siren or a cell phone alert. The human voice is more persuasive than a machine. The warning from a mother or a neighbor carries an emotional weight that a phone buzz does not. In the mobile home park, one resident said she did not take shelter until her daughter called her from 3 streets away and told her that the tornado was coming. By then, she had only 2 minutes. She made it to the bathroom. She survived. The tornado that day was not an anomaly. The atmospheric conditions that produced it are common in the spring and fall in the southeastern United States. The same pattern has produced thousands of tornadoes in the past and will produce thousands more. The science of tornado prediction has improved dramatically since the 190s. The average lead time for a tornado warning in the United States is now about 13 minutes. That is enough time to get to a basement or a safe room. But it is not enough time to change the underlying conditions of poverty, isolation, and vulnerability that put people at risk. The Windsor tornado is a case study in those conditions. It is not a story about a storm. It is a story about a system that works but does not work for everyone. It is a story about a woman who received a warning and did not act, not because she was uninformed, but because she was trapped by her own life. The storm passed, the debris was cleared, the laws were changed, the memories faded, but the question remains, what else could have been done? The answer is not simple. It involves money, politics, infrastructure, education, and the slow work of changing human behavior. It involves building safe rooms. It involves funding emergency management offices. It involves installing sirens. It involves teaching children what to do when the sky turns green. It involves reaching the people who are hardest to reach. Betty Lou Harrell was one of those people. She lived in a mobile home. She had a heart condition. She did not own a car. She did not have a weather radio. She did not understand the siren. She did not know what the warning meant until it was too late. Her death was preventable, but it was not prevented. The system failed her in 1,000 small ways, and those failures added up to a tragedy. The Windsor tornado was a small event in the statistical record, but for the people who lived through it, it was the biggest event of their lives. The scars healed slowly, some never healed. The community rebuilt, new people moved into the mobile home park, the trees grew back, the fields were planted again, but the memory of that Friday afternoon stayed. And every time the siren sounded on the first Wednesday of the month, a few people still looked up at the sky, just in case. At 3:43 p.m. on April 25, 2014, a tornado touched down just west of the town of Windsor in Bertie County, North Carolina. The National Weather Service had already issued a tornado warning at 3:21 p.m. that gave residents 22 minutes of lead time, but the warning reached some people and not others. The tornado itself lasted only about 8 minutes. It traveled a path of 7.5 miles. It was rated EF3 on the enhanced Fujita scale, with winds estimated at 140 miles per hour. It was not a large tornado by width, only 300 yards at its widest, but it stayed on the ground for the entire duration and left a scar across the rural landscape. What happened in those 8 minutes was a product of specific atmospheric conditions. A cold front moved east across the Carolinas that afternoon. Ahead of it, warm and humid air from the Gulf Stream pushed inland. The air was unstable. The wind shear was strong. The combination was typical for tornado formation in the southeastern United States. The Storm Prediction Center had issued a moderate risk for severe weather that morning. The forecast was correct, but the question of how many people would die depended not on the forecast, but on the vulnerabilities waiting on the ground. The tornado first struck a farm on the west side of town. It destroyed a barn. It snapped pine trees at the trunk. It tore the roof off a 2-story house. The occupants of that house had taken shelter in the basement. They survived. The tornado then crossed Highway 45 and entered the edge of Windsor. It hit a small shopping center. It overturned cars. It ripped the facade from a grocery store. 3 people were injured there. The tornado continued east into the mobile home park where Betty Lou Harrell lived. Her mobile home was the first to be hit in that row. The tornado lifted the home off its cinder blocks and rolled it across the yard. She was killed instantly. The three mobile homes next to hers were also destroyed, but the occupants had taken shelter in a neighbor's house. They survived. The tornado then crossed the Kashi River and struck a second mobile home park on the east side of town. In that park, a woman named Teresa Eason had received a call from her daughter. She took shelter in a bathtub. The home was destroyed around her, but she survived with minor cuts. Her neighbor, an elderly man named James White, did not hear the siren. He was watching television. The television did not have a weather alert system. He did not have a cell phone. When the tornado hit, he was thrown from his home and landed in a field. He was taken to the hospital with a broken leg. He survived. In total, 16 people were injured across the two mobile home parks. One died. The emergency response began within minutes of the tornado lifting. The Bertie County Sheriff's Office dispatched deputies to the affected areas. They found debris blocking roads. They used chainsaws to clear trees. They set up a command post at the Windsor Fire Department. Emergency medical services from neighboring counties arrived to help. The Red Cross opened a shelter at the local high school. By evening, the shelter housed 24 people. Most were mobile home residents who had nowhere else to go. The National Weather Service survey team arrived the next morning. They mapped the damage and assigned the rating. They interviewed witnesses. They documented the time of the tornado by analyzing radar data and damage patterns. They concluded that the tornado had likely reached peak intensity just before it hit the mobile home parks. That intensity was EF3. At that strength, a tornado can lift and roll a mobile home with ease. No mobile home is designed to withstand an EF3 tornado. The only survival strategy is to leave. The survey team also examined the warning process. The tornado warning was issued at 3:21 p.m. The storm cell that produced the tornado was first detected by radar at 2:58 p.m. At that point, meteorologists at the National Weather Service office in Wakefield, Virginia, issued a severe thunderstorm warning. They watched the cell strengthen. They saw a debris signature on radar, a small, concentrated area of reflectivity that indicated debris being lofted into the air. They issued the tornado warning 12 minutes later. The average lead time for that tornado was 22 minutes. That is well above the national average. It should have been enough. But 22 minutes is not enough when the warning does not reach the person. Betty Lou Harrell's weather radio never arrived. She relied on the outdoor siren. The siren was activated at 3:23 p.m. That is 2 minutes after the warning was issued. The siren was designed to be heard outdoors. She was inside. Siren sound is about 70 decibels at a distance of 100 feet. Inside a mobile home with a television on and a window air conditioning unit running, the sound is muffled. She may not have heard it at all, or she may have heard it and mistaken it for a test. The monthly test is on the first Wednesday. This was a Friday, but the human brain does not always apply logic in a crisis. The pattern of a siren that sounds every month can become white noise. It can lose its power to alarm. The cell phone alert system also failed in this case. The wireless emergency alert for the tornado warning was sent to all phones in the affected area. But cell phone coverage in rural Bertie County is spotty. Many mobile home residents use prepaid phones. Those phones often do not receive emergency alerts. The alert is sent by broadcast, but the phone must be compatible and the user must not have opted out. Some phones from low-cost carriers do not support the system. Others have the feature turned off by default. The exact number of people who did not receive the alert in Bertie County is unknown, but the survey team estimated that fewer than half of the residents in the mobile home parks had a phone that could receive the alert. The question of why Betty Lou Harrell did not take shelter has a deeper answer. She had a heart condition. She had no car. She could not walk quickly to a neighbor's house. She lived alone. She did not have a family member nearby who could call her. She did not have a weather radio. She did not understand the siren. She was not alone in that situation. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, Bertie County is one of the poorest counties in North Carolina. The median household income in 2014 was $32,000. Nearly 1 in 5 residents lived below the poverty line. Many were elderly. Many did not own a car. Many lived in mobile homes. The county had no public storm shelters. The only safe buildings were the brick structures in town, but those were not within walking distance for many residents. The failure was not the tornado warning. The failure was the system that left people in mobile homes without a safe place to go. The National Weather Service cannot build shelters. Emergency management offices can apply for grants, but the funding is limited. The state of North Carolina has a program for tornado safe rooms, but it is voluntary. In 2014, only a handful of counties had participated. Bertie County was not one of them. The cost of building a community safe room is roughly $100,000. That is not a large amount for a state budget, but it is a large amount for a county with a small tax base. The county had other priorities: roads, schools, health care. The tornado changed the calculus, but only slightly. In the aftermath, the Federal Emergency Management Agency provided assistance to the affected homeowners. Mobile home residents could apply for individual assistance grants to cover temporary housing and personal property loss. But the grants were capped at $33,000. Many residents received only a few thousand. The process required documentation that some did not have. One resident, a single mother of two, said she spent 3 months living in a motel before the grant money arrived. She had to use credit cards to pay for food and gas. She eventually moved out of the county because she could not find affordable housing. The tornado displaced 28 families from the two mobile home parks. Within a year, half of them had moved away from Windsor. The community lost not only homes but people. The long-term impact of the tornado was measured not only in dollars but in trauma. Mental health professionals from East Carolina University conducted a study of survivors 6 months after the storm. They found that nearly 1/3 of the survivors met the criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder. The rate was higher among mobile home residents than among those who lived in permanent homes. The reason was not just the violence of the storm but the loss of security. Mobile home residents already felt vulnerable. The tornado confirmed that fear. One survivor told the researchers that she could not sleep during a thunderstorm for 2 years. She would wake up at the sound of wind and run to the bathroom. She said she felt like the sky was always watching her. The County Emergency Management Office tried to address the fear. They launched a public education campaign. They distributed weather radios at community events. They held tornado drills at the mobile home parks. They put up signs with the address of the nearest brick building that could serve as a shelter. But the turnout was low. Many residents did not attend. They said they did not have time. They said they did not believe it would happen again. The emergency manager later admitted that the campaign was not effective. He said the hardest part was convincing people that a warning was real. The tornado was a once-in-a-lifetime event for Bertie County. The last tornado of that magnitude had hit in 1990. The human mind is not good at evaluating low-probability, high-consequence risks. It is easier to ignore the warning than to act on it. The Betty Lou Harrell Act was a symbolic gesture, but it had no enforcement mechanism. The law required new mobile homes to include a weather radio or a cell phone with a weather alert app. But the mobile home industry opposed the regulation. They argued that it would increase costs for low-income buyers. The final version of the law allowed manufacturers to include the weather radio as an option, not a requirement. The buyer could decline. In practice, most dealers chose not to include the radio. They said customers did not ask for it. The law was a step, but it was a small step on a long road. The larger reform came from the National Weather Service. After the Windsor Tornado, the office in Wakefield, Virginia, revised its warning protocols. They began using a more aggressive tone in tornado warnings for rural areas. They emphasized the words mobile home in the warning text. They asked local media to repeat the message that mobile homes are not safe. They also pushed for more investment in the wireless emergency alert system. But the effectiveness of those changes is hard to measure. Tornado warning lead times have continued to improve. False alarm rates have decreased. But the people who are most vulnerable, the elderly, the poor, the isolated, are still the ones most likely to die. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration studied tornado fatalities from 2000 to 2010. They found that mobile home residents accounted for 45% of all tornado deaths, even though mobile homes make up only 6% of the housing stock. That statistic has not changed significantly despite decades of awareness. The problem is not the warnings. The problem is the housing. Mobile homes are affordable. They are not safe. The only solution is to build safe rooms or to provide alternative housing. That solution costs money that rural counties do not have. It is a political choice. The Windsor Tornado made that choice visible, but it did not change it. The question that remains unanswered is how to close the gap between the science of tornado forecasting and the reality of human vulnerability. On April 25, 2014, the science performed well. The meteorologists did their job. The warning was accurate, but one woman died because the warning did not reach her, and when it did, she could not act. The system works for people who have basements, cars, and cell phones. It does not work for those who do not. The Windsor Tornado is a reminder that the most dangerous element of a tornado is not the wind. It is the society that leaves its most vulnerable members exposed. The storm itself was unremarkable by meteorological standards. It was a springtime tornado in the southeastern United States. It will happen again. The question is whether the next Betty Lou Harrell will have a weather radio, a safe room, or a neighbor who can drive her to safety. The answer is not written in the forecast. It is written in the decisions made by state legislatures, county commissioners, and a culture that values cheap housing over human life. The winds of the tornado lasted 8 minutes. The consequences will last much longer. 8 minutes. That is all the time the tornado spent on the ground. But the storm left behind a question that no meteorologist could answer. It was not a question about wind speed or barometric pressure. It was a question about responsibility. When a warning system works perfectly but the most vulnerable people still die, who is accountable? The National Weather Service cannot build a safe room. The county cannot afford one. The state legislature passed a law that carried no weight. And the woman who died did not own a weather radio. On August 12, 2015, the North Carolina Department of Public Safety submitted a report to the Federal Emergency Management Agency. The report analyzed the response to the Windsor tornado. It contained recommendations: build more safe rooms, improve communication with mobile home parks, provide transportation for elderly residents. The report was thorough. It was also voluntary. There was no requirement that Bertie County or any other rural county follow the recommendations. The report sat on a shelf. The National Weather Service office in Wakefield, Virginia tried something different. They began a program called Storm Ready. The program recognized communities that met certain preparedness standards. Bertie County did not apply. The application required a dedicated emergency operations center. The county did not have one. It required a backup power generator. The county had one, but it was old and unreliable. It required a formal warning dissemination plan. The county had a plan, but it was written in 2006 and had not been updated. The emergency manager said he wanted to apply, but he did not have the staff. He was a volunteer firefighter and a part-time employee. He worked from a desk in the county administration building. The building itself was not rated for tornado winds. The mobile home parks in Windsor remain in operation. They are still occupied by low-income families, elderly residents, and seasonal farm workers. The owners have not installed safe rooms. They are not required to. The county has not condemned the parks. They are up to code. The code is minimal. After the tornado, the state considered requiring mobile home parks to have a community shelter. The mobile home industry argued that the cost would put smaller parks out of business. The state backed down. The trade-off was clear: affordable housing versus safe housing. The choice was made. On April 25, 2024, 10 years after the tornado, Bertie County held a memorial service. It was held at the Windsor Community Center. The building was brick. It had served as an emergency shelter during the storm. The county emergency manager spoke. He read the names of the 2 people who died. He thanked the volunteers who had searched through the debris. He said he remembered the sound of the sirens. He said he remembered the silence afterward. About 60 people attended. Some of them were survivors, others were family members. A few were from the National Weather Service. After the service, a reporter asked the emergency manager if the county was better prepared now than it was in 2004. He paused. Then he said that the county had more weather radios now. He said the schools had conducted drills. He said the mobile home park residents knew to go to the brick church down the road. But he also said that the county still did not have a community safe room. He said that many of the elderly residents still did not have cars. He said that the sirens were still the same sirens. He said that the warning system was better, but the housing stock was the same. He did not say the words, but the implication was clear. The county was better prepared to warn its residents. It was not better prepared to save them. The scientific literature on tornado vulnerability has grown since 2004. Researchers have studied the relationship between poverty and tornado mortality. The findings are consistent. Poor counties have higher death rates. Mobile home residents face greater risk. Elderly individuals are less likely to receive warnings. The literature confirms what the Windsor tornado demonstrated. The solutions are not meteorological, they are economic. The challenge is that the people who need safe rooms are the same people who cannot afford them. The people who need transportation are the same people who cannot afford a car. The people who need a weather radio are the same people who cannot afford a cell phone plan. The problem is circular. It is also solvable. But the solution requires money that rural counties do not have and political will that state legislatures have not shown. The Windsor tornado was not a freak event. It was a textbook example of a predictable disaster. The ingredients were known. A violent tornado hit a rural area with high poverty, low housing quality, and inadequate warning infrastructure. The outcome was inevitable. The tragedy is that it did not have to be. The woman who died had a phone number, she had an address, she lived in a mobile home that was registered with the county. The warning system knew she was there, but there was no way to reach her directly. There was no text message. There was no phone call. There was only a siren that she did not understand. The final lesson of the Windsor tornado is not about technology, it is not about forecasting. It is about the gap between the warning and the response. A siren is only useful if the person who hears it knows what it means. A warning is only effective if the person who receives it can act. A safe room is only a solution if the person who needs it can get there. The winds of the tornado lasted 8 minutes. The consequences will last much longer. And somewhere in a rural county in North Carolina, an elderly woman living alone in a mobile home is listening to the sound of the wind. She does not know where the nearest safe room is. She does not have a weather radio. She does not have a car. She is waiting for a warning that she may not understand.